What's good, Raider Nation? Welcome back to Vegas Nation First and 10, your weekly go-to for Raider news and analysis. I am Vinny Bonsignore. I cover the Raiders for the Las Vegas Review-Journal and Vegas Nation. To my right is my great colleague, Adam Hill. He also covers the Raiders and everything else in Las Vegas for the Review-Journal and Vegas Nation. Before we get to Adam and our thoughts, we just left the field for the Raiders' second OTA practice that was open to the media. Before we get to all of our observations, I want to remind everybody that all of Vegas Nation's podcasts, including First and 10, are brought to you by the Las Vegas Review-Journal and Station Casinos STN Sports, and we thank them for all of their support. We thank you for all of your support. We appreciate it, as always. Adam Hill, another day in the books. We're slowly getting through this part of the off season, and we have one more OTA to be able to watch next week, and then the mandatory mini camp a week after that. I gotta say this. I know I wasn't here for the OTA last week, and I heard Geno Smith had a kind of a rough day, and it happens. I thought, from my perspective today, he looked pretty good, and we got a chance to talk to Geno Smith. But I can't tell you, Adam, what a stark contrast this iteration of the Raiders with a Geno Smith as their quarterback, and hearing Geno Smith and watching him out in OTAs, how big of a difference it is over the last 2 years. Because if you remember, Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't even able to play 2 years ago. So we had Brian Hoyer and Aiden O'Connell was a rookie. So they were on the field this time 2 years ago. And then last year, Raiders didn't even know who their starting quarterback was going to be, and it was Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell kind of going back and forth, and it didn't really look good. And it just feels a lot different. Whatever it turns out to be this year from a one-loss standpoint, it definitely feels like they're in a better place, at least at starting quarterback.
It does, and especially, from just the purely quarterback perspective, if you want to go there, it's, you're watching, okay, there's the starter. He's taking the reps right now. That's the starter. When he's working with a certain group, you're like, okay, they're working that guy in with the starting quarterback. Mm-hmm. You know who it is. As you said, Garoppolo wasn't even here.
Right.
Last year was a battle for the quarterback, so it was like back and forth. It was a competition, which is another element to this time of season when guys are competing against each other and you're watching every snap by every guy. Now you understand, that's the starter. That's what they're working on. And so, it is a little bit different from that perspective for sure. I do want to, I know people there's a couple comments, and I will tell people I absolutely agree. Everyone you hear talking this week, every question you hear to coaches, everything we see on the show feels different. And then you go back and you look, and last year, every single comment was, it just feels different. Feels different.
No doubt.
With McDaniels.
It just
feels different. It feels different.
For me, it looks different.
But I think just from it always does, though, because it's a different coach, a different way.
When you look it did look it looked different last year for the wrong reasons.
Sure.
It did.
But I will say that I think what we're talking about right here is just from the quarterback perspective, understanding who the starter is and knowing, it's not just a random sampling of, hey, who's this guy, mm-hmm. Why is this guy working with this guy, whatever. It's, hey, that's the starter, they're working with the starter. It definitely does feel objectively different from that perspective, and it's always going to feel different. It's going to be more energy, or more strict, or more whatever. It's always going to be, and I think intentionally so. Mm-hmm. When you have a new coach, a new regime, they're trying to make it different, right? They're here because the last thing didn't work, right? So Josh McDaniels is here because things weren't working the way, although kind of, you can argue. Right. Antonio Pierce is here because Josh McDaniels wasn't working, so he's going to dramatically change things. So it's always going to be different with a new regime. But I think from that perspective of understanding who the quarterback is, knowing he's here, knowing when he's on the field, these are the ones, that is different this time of year for sure.
And we're going to hear from Geno Smith right now.
Yeah, I think leadership to me comes naturally. Being the oldest child in my family, so always having to lead by example. And, I think for me, when you talk about leadership, it really comes down to integrity. That's a big thing for me is what you do when no one's watching. And I try to, be a passionate leader, but I also try to lead by example. So I'm not the biggest talker. Instead I'm the guy who's trying to be the hardest worker. And so I just want to continue to lead, by example and, push myself, push my teammates to get better.
We saw you connecting with Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker. What do you think of your new weapons here in Las Vegas?
Man, I'm loving it, man. They're making my job tremendously easy to be out here with these young, talented players, man. I think we have a really good team, a really good, array of weapons, and just a bunch of different guys that can do a lot of great things. And so, obviously Brock is who he is. Getting to know Trey, getting to know Jacoby, and watching Michael go out there and make plays. Ashton's coming along. The offensive line's doing a great job. I think Chip is, calling great plays. And, it's really easy for me. I just got to go out there and be myself and get the ball into their hands and let them be special.
Geno, what is it like working with Chip Kelly? He recruited you, and now you're playing for him.
In many ways, it's a dream come true because I've always revered, Coach Kelly, and I've always thought he's been an excellent coach throughout his career and a guy who I've, really, wanted to play for, even back then when I was in high school. It didn't work out that way, but God works in mysterious ways, and here we are today in Las Vegas. And so, being with Chip, you get to know him as a man, know what he's about, outstanding human being, but also just a great mind. And, he has a great mind for football and understands how to motivate guys, and I think that's a really good trait that he has.
How would you describe this offense?
I think the offense is, like I say all the time, we want to be efficient. That's the main thing, right? We want to do well in the situations, the third downs, the red zones, but also we want to be explosive, and so when teams come up and play us in man-to-man, we got guys who are going to win those matchups, and, I really feel good about where we are. Still a work in progress, but we're in a good spot, and, we just got to keep working hard to get better.
I'll say this, and that was Geno Smith speaking after today's OTA practice. It does sound a little bit different because I feel like Geno Smith brings a calming presence in how he carries himself and how he speaks. This is a sage, what is he, 29 years old, 30 years old, a guy that's seen every iteration of football from the highest of the highs to the lowest of the lows, getting cut basically and moved on from and being a backup, and now coming off 3 straight really pretty decent years for a starting quarterback. Again, you go back to a Gardner Minshew last year, a kind of a bright-eyed rookie second-year player in Aiden O'Connell. I feel like from that perspective, a real true leadership perspective.
Yeah, adult in the room. They say
Exactly.
I think is something.
There you go.
That's an expression that people use, I believe. I think you feel that for sure. You want me to really throw people off and get people annoyed?
Go ahead.
Throw of the day. I don't think you're over there. It was pretty wild.
Was it the one? Which one in the end zone to?
It was made by Carter Bradley.
Oh yeah,
Which was
he can sling it a little bit.
It was wild. He was moving forward. He was throwing a lot of sidearm today. I don't know if it's something he was working on.
Yeah, I saw it during warm-ups. Actually.
Yeah, he's almost every throw I think was sidearm. I think he's maybe working on something new. I don't think that's going to be his necessarily throwing stance, but especially everything that was moving, anything off platform was always going sidearm, and he slung one down. I was blown away by the throw. It was pretty crazy, but that was just a slight observation. But yeah, I think you understand. Everybody kind of understands their roles right now. I know everything is competition about Pete Carroll, and every role is up for grabs. All that.
You don't want competition at quarterback unless you've got the number 1 pick overall, and he's
But you understand where everybody stands in the pecking order right now, and you're kind of seeing that play out. And even now in OTAs, there's a proportionate number of reps. I mean, you're seeing Cam Miller just get a couple of reps at the very end, and Carter Bradley getting a very similar number, and then you see Geno obviously taking the first ones and the most important ones, and then Aiden O'Connell gets his. He's had a pretty nice day today as well. So you see the structured organization and the understanding of those roles in the quarterback room, which is different than it has been the last couple of years.
Let's go and talk about Jacoby Myers. He basically said that I don't know if he intentionally said this or just kind of fell upon it, but a little bit of stability, because when you think about Jacoby Myers, you have to go all the way back to really Tom Brady, when he was playing with Tom Brady, and that was very early in his career with the New England Patriots.
He mentioned that. He said he had 1 year with him, and that was it.
And then it was Mac Jones. Right, which, okay. Then it was Jimmy Light, Jimmy Garoppolo Light. He was never the same player when he got to the Raiders. And then Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. And can you imagine him going, okay, this is my quarterback now? That feels a lot better. If you're a wide receiver, it's got to feel better.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And obviously, Jacoby coming off a very productive year last year, despite all the changes. So I'm sure in his mind, he's like, hey, I did that despite all these changes you're talking about, all this different systems, different quarterback, different guy throwing me the ball. Last year, 2 different guys throwing me the ball. Losing the guy that was above you on the depth chart and the guy that's a superstar player, Devontae Adams, where his role changed midway through the year, and he had his most productive season.
And why did Devontae leave? Quarterback.
Well,
yeah,
I think there's a lot of reasons.
I do too, but I think if you have a good quarterback, he's not going anywhere.
I'm thinking of a story right now too that I don't really want to tell right now, and I guess we shouldn't. But yeah, it's there was a lot of things. But yes, I think that was a big part of it for sure, and and coach situation too, which we talked about, different coaching structure and that sort of thing. So I think Jacoby, I'm sure is looking at it and saying, hey, look, I did what I did last year with that.
Right.
What could I do now?
Exactly. A couple of observations for me. Starting offensive line, quote unquote. DJ Glaze at right tackle. Alex Kappa at right guard. Jackson Powers Johnson at center. Dylan Parham at left guard. And Colt Miller at left tackle. I know it's May, 29th or so. I'm not so sure that we're reading too much into that. Maybe that is what that's the direction that they're leaning on with that offensive line.
Potentially. Yeah. I would say that I was kind of noticing some of the same things. Said, this is, and then I looked and I'm like, no, it's not, because there's this random guy out at the side, and
of course,
especially defensively, you're like, there's like
but it
8
was
starters.
The first. It was 11 on 11. That was the first one.
Yeah. But I think that was also when there was 8 starters on the field on defense, and then 2 that I was like, where's that guy coming? What was that? What's that situation? So I think they're mixing and matching. I think that we're told that every year by coaches of do not read anything into what's going on. But I think there's some spots where you're starting to see pretty clearly guys are taking the first reps, and they're taking reps with the other starters and other projected ones.
Because I think DJ's going to be the right tackle. Jackson Powers Johnson is going to be the center. Obviously, Colt Miller is going to be the left tackle. And I feel like the money that they gave Alex Kappa and the position that he's traditionally played, if he's going to be a starter, that he's going to be the starter at right guard. So how do you see the left guard position playing out? If those 4 positions,
I tend to still think all 3 players potentially are in the mix for the 2 guard spots, including. Look, we overlook him all the time, but Jordan Meredith is a guy.
But hey, what a great solid
because he's too quiet and he's too nice and he doesn't make any noise, and you kind of forget him, but he actually played well in stretches last year for sure. I actually was thinking about this just from to go inside what we do a little bit from a writing perspective. I'm trying so hard to think of an angle to do on Jordan Meredith, because I look back and I've written 2 features about him. Both of them are just about how nice he is.
Yeah.
And just talking to other guys about how nice of a person he is and how friendly and engaging. Right. And he's that role in the locker room of somebody that kind of floats around, brings all the different groups together. He's just such a nice and welcoming guy. And I think because of that, sometimes you forget that he actually he can play.
He's good. He's a starter in this league, I think.
So, I think it's very possible. So, I think he's in the mix still. I think Cap is in the mix, Parham. I think it would make sense if Cap was on the right and maybe Parham and Meredith are battling on the left. But look, we talked about not necessarily wanting a position battle at quarterback. Everywhere else, you kind of want guys to be fighting out and fighting for positions and see who can win the job.
Exactly. Another observation that I had, and I forced myself, and it wasn't hard, but I forced myself to watch Dante Thornton. And I specifically was watching his footwork and his get off the line of scrimmage. I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised at how smooth he was operating from that standpoint. Obviously, we talked about this. This dude is legit what you want to see in a wide receiver from a perimeter standpoint. He is long and lean, and he's obviously fast. And as Chip Kelly said, there aren't that many human beings that possess the size and the speed he does. But he needs to be, at this level, because we've seen guys flame out that just didn't have the intricacies and the fundamentals and the understanding of the wide receiver position from a lot of different perspectives. So I was pleasantly surprised by the footwork off the line of scrimmage. I think that's a good starting point. It sounded like, I think it was Jacoby, or no, I forget who it was. It might have been Geno talking about how, kind of surprised about how well-rounded,
Jacoby, I think.
How well-rounded of a wide receiver he is.
And he was asked specifically. I would say there's some things you notice. You're like, all right, there's still work to do for sure. Of course. But he could be used in other ways on the field.
Oh, well, let's get right to it. And I was thinking about you, by the way, when I saw him doing what I'm almost 100% sure this is where you're going with. There's going to be more kickoffs this year.
Yeah.
There's going to be more kickoffs.
Yep.
And
somebody who's been begging and pleading for this finally got their way. I guess.
You're going to get your wish.
There's going to be more kickoff returns, and he could be an interesting option.
A couple of guys that, and if he can secure it, why not? And then all of a sudden you're talking about a guy like the former Falcons, Patterson.
Yeah.
Somebody like that. I don't know if he's as dynamic with the ball as Patterson is just a witch when it comes to doing things with the ball. But I also felt like Tommy Millott looked really natural on the kickoffs and the punt returns. Dylan Laube is still in that mix. But I noticed that, and I was thinking about you when I did see it. A couple other observations. Cornerback, it was the two safeties were. I'm not going to read too much into this, but Isaiah Palamao, and I saw a lot of Lonnie Johnson back there at safety. I don't think was Jeremy Chin out there.
It's a good question.
Yeah, we'll double check that because I don't remember circling his name very much.
Certain formations I don't remember seeing him.
Yeah.
When we are accustomed to seeing it.
And then the cornerbacks, Darren Porter was out there with quote unquote the starters quite a bit, and then the other cornerback was Eric Stokes was out there, and a little bit of Darnay Holmes was out there, and I'm losing track of somebody.
I saw Jacorian for sure.
Jacorian was out there as well. Exactly, Jacorian was out there as well. So, what do you make of there? I think it's going to be a constant battle all throughout training camp.
Yeah, and I think they kind of know they need to find answers. They need to find somebody that steps up, that wants to take that position, those positions on, and kind of sees those opportunities, because that is a question mark for the team. I don't think there's any question about it. They tried to address it in the offseason, but I think there's still more work to do potentially in terms of adding personnel. But if they don't, then somebody has to take that job, and that's what they want. That's what they want to see. That's what Pete Carroll talks about all the time. Get a bunch of guys and see who wants to take it.
I saw Charles Snowden dropping it back on 11-on-11, drop it back on pass coverage, like literally man on man. It wasn't even dropping into his zone. He was grabbing somebody and running with them. That was kind of interesting. Elana Roberts, Devin White were the linebackers. Did see some Lindingham, the rookie from Minnesota, came out there, got some run. But I want to go back to Darren Porter because it feels like he's on a fast track maybe. And I was told on draft night by some people in the NFL, look, this guy's 24 years old. Cannot lose sight of that. And he's raw when it comes, for obvious reasons, making the move from wide receiver to cornerback. This is a guy, because of the age and because of the experience at cornerback, is going to have to be on an expedited development track. And it'll be interesting to see if he's able to get it to the point where he can contribute early on, or do we just see him on special teams this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're trying to get it to where he can play and contribute. I think defensively, special teams would probably be the first place you would shine. Right. I mean, it was something he did very well in college. So I'm sure that's going to be a big part of what he does, especially early on. But I think they would like to see him get to the point where he is pushing for one of those spots.
Anything into him getting a lot of run with the quote-unquote starters?
No, I think they're trying to throw him into the fight more than anything. Not necessarily that they think he's there, but that they're trying to throw him in. And talking to some of the assistant coaches yesterday, as we had a chance to do, one of the things that was mentioned was that there is, as much as we talk about the negatives of a guy that doesn't have much experience at a position, there's positives too.
Very much.
Don't develop bad habits.
Exactly.
And
I can mold you.
Yeah, and that is it's certainly something that I think the coaches are intrigued by, to say, hey, he has not played this position very long. Doesn't have a lot of experience doing it, which means, he needs to learn, but he doesn't have these bad habits that we have to fix.
Right, and DeCameron Richardson was another guy that I saw out there. And talking to Marcus Robertson, you mentioned the assistant coaches, talked to him a little bit about DeCameron and some of the other longer and leaner cornerbacks that they have on this roster, including Eric Stokes is a pretty tall kid. Lonnie Johnson can go back and forth between safety and cornerback. But one thing that Marcus brought up to me, Coach Robertson brought up to me, was like, you're trying to get guys that you don't want the ball thrown over you. Yeah. So the long and lean, there's some practicality besides just the toughness and the ruggedness and all that. But forcing quarterbacks to have to throw over guys that are already tall, then also have long arms and can leap, makes it a little bit more difficult to drop balls over cornerbacks that are that tall.
Yeah, I think that's for sure. I mean, there's probably some negatives too. But usually it's that you're not as fluid. You can't move as. But when you have a guy like Porter who is all of those things,
right.
and
a former wide receiver, by the way,
and also just giant.
Mm-hmm.
That does add a different element to how they have to play.
Right. All right. So that's some of our observations today. Again, it's OTAs. There's not real blocking going on, so it's going to be really difficult to assess the offensive line until training camp.
There was one big piece of information, though.
Go ahead.
We have the record set straight, although I don't think we do, about the Ashton Genty stance change.
Oh, yeah.
So Ashton Genty said that Chip Kelly came up to him and said, "Hey, that's not an athletic stance. Think about how I'll get to that. Think about how basketball players play defense. They're bent knee." So Ashton Genty told that story, became this massive national headline, and everybody was talking about it. Chip Kelly said today, "Want to make it clear? I started to ask the question. He cut me off. Make it clear. That is not my decision. However, listen to what he says here.
Oh,
Because
of course.
we will get into exactly what his answer tells us.
Right.
Ashton made a lot of headlines when he said you asked him to change his stance.
All right, let's get that clarified.
Okay.
Dylan McCulla, our running back coach, is in charge of stances, steps, alignments, assignments, and techniques. So he talked to him about that. I gave him an analogy of an athlete being in a bent knee position to make a play, and that kind of got blown into. I haven't told anybody on this team to be in any stances because I don't coach a position. So, but it's a bent knee game. You know, baseball is, if you look at before the ball snapped in baseball, or the pitch is thrown in baseball, everybody's got their knees bent. In any athletic sport you're playing, you got to bend your knees. And if you got to run a flat route on Fred Warner, you better be in a position to run because that dude can fly. You know, so all we're trying to do is put guys in positions to make plays, and he's adapted really well from going from here to here. So it literally is about 3 inches. So I really don't think that is that big a deal. So, but he's awesome, and he's such a coachable guy that you can do a lot of things with him. You know, I think he can play in the slot. You know, he can play in the backfield. He can do a lot of different things. So he's special.
Look, maybe the message initially got sent by Dylan McCulla.
Chip Kelly said, "Hey, go tell Ashton Genty," because if you hear Chip, he's like, "That wasn't me. That was Dylan McCulla. That's the position coach.
My lieutenant."
But then he gives this long answer, as you hear, about why the stance is preferred,
which is absolutely true.
And he might be right, and that's
Yeah.
fine. But clearly, he's passionate about this topic.
Right.
Like, he does think it matters. So
Because he was
it
saying,
came from
if
it.
you want to get up around Fred Warner.
Yeah, if you're doing a flat route against Fred Warner, you
Yeah.
want to be in a ready position before.
Exactly. It makes a lot of sense. Now, here's my question: is that I think Chip Kelly is wise enough to know that if it's taking away even the slightest from what Ashton Genty's capable of doing, they're gonna be like, go back to doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
So it's May. We'll see how that goes. But I will say this: I didn't really even realize or notice, because I was so caught up in Ashton Genty, the great running back, when he got the ball handed to him, that I really wasn't paying attention, to be honest with you, with how he was, the non-crouch stance that he was in, until he was on John Gruden's podcast, or whatever whatever show that John Gruden was doing, and John Gruden pointed it out. And I'll say this, Adam, I can't get it out of my head now. Like, it's the first thing I look at whenever I look at the Boise State highlights, because it's weird. It's a weird stance.
Yeah, and covering UNLV the last couple of years, it's something that's been very noteworthy, and people have talked about, compared it to Michael Myers in Halloween,
right?
For the way that he just kind of stands, he's just
and then bang,
and then goes. But I do think Chip Kelly is right for a couple of reasons. First of all, that's just athletic stance. We know that. But I have questioned, and from covering him, and we've done on this podcast too, Ashton Genty, the receiver, which is a very, very important part of being a running back, and Ashton Genty, the pass blocker.
They threw him a lot. They threw him the ball quite a few times today. Go ahead.
They did, and Ashton Genty, the pass blocker,
for
too.
sure.
And that's the first thing. Chip Kelly didn't say, "Hey, when you take a handoff, you want to That's different.
Exactly.
It's the pass route stuff, the pass protection, those sorts of things. And that's where they need him to improve. That's where all rookies as running backs have to do the most work.
Right.
And you did see them throwing the ball quite a bit. But the first thing he said about the stance wasn't, you got to get up in the hole and take the because everybody knows he can do that.
Yeah.
And by the way, you're moving forward, so you're already getting down into the stance. That doesn't matter. It's how you start off in the pass protection, in the pass routes. That's where they want him to have the stance fixed, and that's where it becomes most important. And maybe that's why there was some question marks about him as a receiver. Stance could have something to do with it.
Could be, but you go back to the year before last year, where he was one of the better.
It's just the way that they used it, because they would just toss it to him. Like, they would just toss it to him to get him out of the.
Which they threw him a couple of.
But he ran a couple routes today, right? I mean, he looked different.
It did. But they were also doing what they did to him at Boise State a couple of years ago. Just get him the ball in space and go let him do his thing. I'm really looking forward to seeing Ashton Genty. Before we get out of here, we got to go to our own Heidi Fang and Station Casinos Sports and Racebook Director Chuck Esposito. They're going to talk about Week 1. Yes, Week 1. AFC West. Props and bets, those types of things. So let's send it over to Heidi Fang and Chuck Esposito from STN Sports Station Casinos.
Joining us now on the Vegas Nation podcast, we have the race and sportsbook director from Station Casinos, Chuck Esposito, in for his weekly segment. I'm Heidi Fang, joining you here as well. Chuck, first of all, let's get right into, the week one odds that have been posted up at Station Casinos and on the STN Sports app. As I welcome you in here today, we've got all the teams, of course, playing week one. And the interesting one to me, out of the AFC West, is that the Broncos are favored against Tennessee by 7.5. Let's get into some of those numbers here, Chuck. And how are you?
I'm doing great, Heidi. It's always good to talk with you for a weekly segment. And a lot of times there's a lot of football going on. This is maybe a little bit of the lull as teams are getting ready for their OTAs. We've gone through the draft. We've got all of our kind of props up on the board right now. But we do have week one up, as you mentioned. So I think the Broncos are a really interesting team. They're getting a lot of hype in the offseason. Bo Nix, if he can take another step. Of course, with a coach that is a quarterback guru in Sean Payton, what he did for Drew Brees. But they're a 7.5-point favorite against a Titan team that most people think are going to be toward the bottom overall in the league. And then, of course, you've got Chiefs Chargers. So you've got an interdivision game week 1-2 that play, and that's the game that we're on that Friday. So we'll see what happens there. But Broncos are getting a lot of love from the bettors right now.
Yeah, the Chiefs are an interesting team to me that, you brought that game up because it feels like historically they tend to start slow. And as 2.5 favorites against the Chargers, I'm wondering, has this brews a new rivalry here with Jim Harbaugh at the helm of the Chargers team and what he might bring here in his second year as their coach? What do you think that, between these two teams and how they might kick off this season in a rivalry, so to speak, in an AFC divisional matchup?
I think now that you've got Sean Payton and Jim Harbaugh in that division, that the gap has really narrowed. Kansas City is still Kansas City with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and as good as they are. But I think the gap has really narrowed right now. Unfortunately, I'm not really talking about the Raiders in that same breath. I know adding Pete Carroll now, you've got a division of Super Bowl winning coaches or national championship winning coaches. So from a coaching standpoint, it might be the best division in football. But I do think that the Chargers are going to be a much better team, and I really think that the Broncos are going to be a much better team. So it's hard, as good as the Chiefs are with Reid and Mahomes, to kind of maintain that top echelon and not maybe take a step back when the other teams have really, in my opinion, closed the gap. And I think the bettors would agree with me and have seen that as well. And I think it's evident in the lines that you're seeing week one.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the coaching, Pete Carroll. Well, also who comes along with Pete Carroll, Geno Smith. I'm very curious to see what they put out on the field in week one. However, they're still underdogs. They are on the road. They are going back east. They are facing somebody who they have a lot of familiarity with in Josh McDaniels. Well, not necessarily this team, but the organization has some familiarity with Josh McDaniels, as does Pete Carroll from back in his earlier coaching days.
I think when you look at the Raiders, and I know we talked about this last week, it's just their travel schedule. It's back east, home, back east, home. They have a really difficult kind of early travel schedule. And Mike Vrabel now with the Patriots, and he's done a really good job. It seems like in the offseason, he's a motivator. I mean, he comes in after being out for a year. Pete Carroll comes in, so you've got two coaches that didn't coach last year that are coming back as a head coaching job. So I think it's an interesting dynamic there. But both teams have, look at the Patriots, a young quarterback in Drake May that they're hoping takes the next step. And in Geno Smith's case, the Raiders are hoping that he kind of solidifies that position and helps that offense kind of establish more of a passing game, which they didn't have last year.
Yeah, and the last thing here for me is just we talked about those AFC West numbers, but Chip Kelly comes in as the Raiders offensive coordinator, and we had the opportunity to speak with him today. And I wanted just to kind of get your take on what you make of his offense and how that's going to help their passing game.
Well, I'm sure Raider Nation is hoping it's dynamic. You add Genty to the mix, and I can't imagine that. We've got props up for, his touchdowns and rushing yards, and I can't imagine that he, over's been bet pretty heavily already. And I think part of that is the Chip Kelly factor, is that he's going to be heavily involved in the passing game, goal line situations, in on all three downs. So I'm anxious to kind of see how that translates to the Raiders offense and how much Brock Bowers is involved, and with Geno Smith, how that offense kind of evolves throughout the course of the season.
Great stuff there, Chuck. I appreciate your time as always here on the Vegas Nation podcast. And we're going to toss it back now to Adam and Vinny, who are discussing all things that have happened here during OTAs at Raiders headquarters.
Thanks to Heidi, Fang, and Chuck Esposito from Station Casinos Sports. All right, so week 2 is in the books. It was warm. It's a little bit hot out there today.
It was warm. I was having the conversation. It sounds ridiculous, but I said it didn't feel hot, but the sun felt strong.
Okay.
I think that's what it was today. I don't know why that was, but
yeah. And it's supposed to be nicer next week?
It's supposed to be. Next couple days are going to be really hot, but next week's supposed to be very nice.
All right, we're looking forward to that. We'll see what it looks like for minicamp. And I think Pete Carroll is getting a first, as was Geno Smith. He was sweating when he was talking to us. And this is a guy from Florida, so he knows heat. Yeah. But it's a different heat here in Las Vegas. I'm just saying. All right, what are you looking forward to seeing next week when we see him for the last time in OTA?
Oh, special teams work all the time.
There you go.
That's what it's all about. I love it. Just the continuation of what they're doing, just more and more progression. And you saw less tip balls today, but still a lot. And I just caution because I see a lot of people like on Twitter talking about, so it sounds like a lot of tip balls. Like, yes, because there's no pass rush.
Right.
So they can't rush, so they just stand up and try to block it. So don't judge that. And by the way, be careful on big plays, stuff like that gets reported because there was like a pretty long touchdown. One of the other reporters was going crazy. I know they were going to go out and talk about it, and I was like, that was a sack.
Yeah, it would have been a sack.
What are you talking about? Like,
the touchdown throw to Alex Bachman.
Yep.
Yeah,
it was
it was. It was a nice catch by Alex, and he had a nice little celebration. So you know who was interesting to me? I know we talked about him a little bit real quick. Kyle Phillips. He also looked really natural on punt returns. He's got a little more speed than I thought that he had. So kind of an interesting player to keep an eye on. Chip mentioned Ian, the tight end.
Ian Thomas.
Ian Thomas. He mentioned Ian Thomas. So there was there's some interesting players out there. I don't know where the room is for a lot of these guys. The tight end room is pretty crowded as it is. But there's some interesting players that I can't wait to see once they finally get out on the pads and get into the preseason. But Kyle Phillips is somebody that I think could be a sneaky guy to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's been, I was talking about him a little bit early in practice today. Saw some stuff out of him. So, it's he's a guy that's always had a lot of talent. He's been hurt a lot for sure. Bouncing around a
Played
little bit.
Played for Chip at UCLA.
Yeah, so reunion there. See if you can. Bring the best out of them.
There you go. All right. Enjoy your weekend. We'll be back at it next week after week 3 of OTAs. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing, hitting the like button, all those things that you do. You're why we do what we do. I want to say thanks again to the Las Vegas Review-Journal and, of course, Station Casinos STN Sports. I want to say thanks to Heidi Fang, our great producer. Until next week, enjoy the weekend, and we will talk to you later.